And your presentation is starting now.
Thank you very much, Samir. Good evening and welcome to all of you joining us for tonight's roundtable discussion on the cyber risks for businesses. A company's board has a duty to understand and oversee the significant risks posed to the company they preside over. Over the past 2 years, businesses have faced an increasing number of cyber risks, threatening their ability to continuously operate, stealing valuable data, and in some cases, shutting them down altogether. Tonight, what to do when your business falls victim to a cyber attack, and how should boards and businesses better ensure their continuity in a world in which cyber risks are rapidly evolving and growing. I'm Yanya Viskovich, and joining me tonight to give you some answers to these questions and more, multiple board member and member of the board and chair of the Cyber Resilience chapter of the Swiss Risk Association, Dr. Maya Bundt, Chief Transformation Officer at MS Reinsurance, Suzanne Knedinger, and CEO of cybersecurity provider DGC Switzerland, Andreas Pankow. Welcome to you all, and thanks very much for sharing your expertise tonight with us. To those of you joining online, we know that you two have a wealth of expertise and we'd love to hear from you. So please get your questions ready and share them with us in the comment box. We will make time at the end of our discussion to answer them. Our hashtag tonight is hashtag cyber resilience. So please get involved in the discussion on Twitter and LinkedIn. So Andreas, I'm going to start with you. This year seems to have been witnessing a proliferation of cyber attacks. They've affected businesses and organizations across the world. Cyber attacks are consistently listed as one of the top 10 business risks. And for many businesses, that's despite the advantages that recent digital transformations may have brought about. Can you explain why it is that despite digital transformations, many businesses are falling victim to cyber attacks?
Yeah, thanks, Yanya. The question is a very interesting one, and it's not despite digitalization, it is because of digitalization. We're seeing indeed a tremendous increase in cyber attacks across all industries, across many, many countries, and if maybe not even across the world. But it is not something particular about this year. If I look in our statistics, then digitalization obviously is going on for years now, and it is accelerating exponentially. Now we had an effect on digitalization, which is called COVID. All of a sudden, many industries, if not even all, had to digitalize certain elements of their value chain. Some just by sending their people home to the home office, and all of a sudden communication was only on a digital way through conference calls or any other digital device. But also the whole part of selling your goods or communicating to your vendors happened digitally. So, you know, my example is always the shop around the corner all of a sudden started e-commerce. And that meant they digitalized a certain element of their value chain, and they didn't plan to. They were just literally overnight urged to become digital, otherwise they would have been out of business. Now, let's say we are post-COVID phase now, but many of these companies keep certain digital elements, you know, either because it's cost efficient, some really appreciate it, others found out that they're actually generating more profit by acting digital than going back to the analog world. What they all, not all, but what many of them forgot in the journey of digitalization is to have a look into the security aspect of it. Partially because it was an urgency to act. You know, no one said like, well, we're not going to go digital before we did our security checks. So it was a mixture between urgency and kind of laziness and not paying enough attention. And some just didn't know better. And now we have the wave hitting us really hard. And you know, if you look into statistics, then an attacker on average is between 2 and 6 months in your systems before actually the attack happens. So, you know, looking back in the timeline, that kind of explains why 2022 showed that spike in attacks.
Yeah, I mean, I read recently that on average, it takes 22 days following a ransomware attack for a business to deal with that interruption. The average interruption is 22 days for any business faced with a ransomware attack. And these days, on average, 2/3 of small and medium businesses go out of business within 6 months of a cyber attack. In your view, has security been overlooked in favor of business efficiencies?
There are various reasons why that has happened or why that is still happening. One fact for sure, there's a group of companies, or company owners, that just don't see themselves at risk. You know, there's like, well, these will be the big companies, you know, the SMI companies, the Eurostoxx companies that will be attacked. And yes, indeed, they are attacked. If I just had a conversation with one of the CISOs from a SMI company, he said we have 1,000 attacks a day. And yes, that's probably way more attacks than any SME company has. Nevertheless, there is no industry out there that is not in the focus of attackers. There's no industry, there's no company size, and there's a very simple reason for that. Also, attackers digitalize. Also, attackers get more professional. You know, there is not that old image we all have in front of our face when, you know, there's that guy sitting somewhere in the basement with his hoodie and trying to hack. I mean, they might still exist, and they probably exist, and they are somewhere. But there is that other group, you know, there are professional companies doing that. So the attacks are getting automized. You know, when we talk on the good side about automating pen tests, you know, the simulation of hacker attacks, we are simulating hacker attacks. That doesn't mean that the other side is not also automating pen tests. It's just not a test. It's a hack. It's an attack. So there is no industry. And if I look into our analysis of, you know, when we scan whole countries and we see and look into the vulnerabilities, you know, there is not a certain industry, a certain region, a certain company type that is not getting attacked.
Can I jump in there, Andreas? I think you've said something that really speaks to my heart. In German, I always say, da ist kein Unternehmen zu klein, Opfer eines Cyberangriffes zu sein. In English, that doesn't rhyme, but it will translate to something like there is no business too small to be a victim of a cyber event. Now, what many people overlook is they don't have to be actually attacked specifically. There is this thing like collateral damage or drive-by events, attacks, and they are just a victim because they are there, or they are a victim because their defenses are just not good enough. So I think this understanding of I'm in the focus, or I'm not in the focus, that's the wrong thing to think. It's
absolutely, and they are just using the wrong software. Yeah, you know, if there is a software
supplier
or the wrong
service suppliers, third party, you might just be at the wrong, at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and then you're there.
Yeah, and I think that's also where we need to understand. I mean, the people are behind that, you know. I mean, on both sides, and I think for me it's kind of like, you know, you let everybody loose on a car on our roads that hasn't had a driver's test. And that's what we do with digitalization, you know, and that's what happened in the last couple of years, where everybody had to move people home for work, and where we actually use many more devices. I mean, how secure is your mobile phone? Yes, and you lock it to your car, and the entire address book is downloaded. And are you sure that this is actually what you wanted to do? And do you know? And I think it's just everybody is affected, and I think that's what people are not aware yet. Oh, I never get sick, you know. It's like a bit for me a bit similar, and yeah, I never get attacked. Forget it. It's not never. It's the question is when and what you do.
Absolutely.
Well, it's funny. This is something that we have seen, I think, in the past. It also showed in the uptake of, for example, cyber insurance. How aware are people? You know, are they interested in this? And I thought I was so convinced that over the last 2 years, with all the media attention and all the ransomware attacks, everybody knew about this and was aware. But unfortunately, I think not yet. Not yet. There's still this kind of denial happening in parts where people, also business leaders, don't take it seriously enough, I would say.
Maya, why do you think that is? I mean, you sit on multiple boards. Why do you think that, as you say, senior business leaders are not taking it always so seriously as they need to?
So all the boards that I sit on and all the companies also take it very seriously. So and many others do as well. But you have to understand that a business's role is not to protect against cyber risk per se. A business role is to do business, right? So there are so many risks right now. There is so many going on that honestly, I think is just overwhelming with everything ongoing. That you have to prioritize, and you have to prioritize in terms of time, you have to prioritize in terms of where you focus on, and you have to prioritize in terms of investments as well. So it is honestly, I think it's hard for many businesses who are not in the cyber business, like you, Andreas, to get this right. On the other hand, what I always say is managing cyber risks nowadays is part of the cost of doing business. So like you pay your people, like you have your processes in place, and managing your cyber risk is part of that. And I think this is something that is we're learning and we are getting better at. So I'm optimistic there as well, but it's still a ways until that is really in the DNA of every organization that we're talking about.
I fully agree, and I want to add to that. If you look into the typical mid-cap company in Europe, well, now let's take Germany as a particular example. There's a generation change happening. Those mid-cap companies facing the succession problem, as we all know, and the next generation needs to take over. Now, having said that, the average company owner, if you look at the German mid-cap companies, is way above 60s, in the late 60s, statistically. Now, for them, the digitalization, not only in the business side, but also in the private side, is kind of a challenge. And don't we all know these situations interacting with our parents when it comes to, WhatsApp, Facebook, and WhatsApp? It is a challenge for them. Now, if we look into their entrepreneurial world, all of a sudden they're facing cyber risk, they're facing digitalization. That is a challenge for them. Now, we talked about budgeting, and I fully agree, it needs to be a certain part of the budget. That's the one thing. The other thing is it needs to be a board topic. It needs to be a management topic, which is not yet. Now you sit there and you talk to an entrepreneur who, he owns a mid-cap company, one of these typical global market leaders. They rule their world in their industry. They're the rulers. And here comes someone from somewhere attacking this company. And now you're talking to your own IT department. And you're telling, the IT department tells you, look, cybersecurity costs X, Y, Z. They say, what is cybersecurity? These company owners, they can't handle the topic because they say, like, what, you want to spend that amount of money for something that protects me from something I can't even touch? They'll find out when they come to the office one day and all the systems are down. But until then, it is so difficult for them to understand what it is and why they would need to spend money to prevent an attack or to reduce the damage that happens through an attack. And so there is that challenge adding to what you said, and that's a challenge, and you need external support there. Your IT department, and there are very, very qualified people in the IT departments. But cybersecurity is a very specific topic, and it's a big mistake to think that you can handle that topic yourself. You need third-party support. Now, whom do you talk to? Where do you go? Whom do you ask? And as an IT responsible person in a company, you don't want to do a mistake because the owner trusted you for even decades, and now you don't want to face it and say, like, what? I don't know what to do. We need someone else or so. So it's a kind of a very unstable situation to a certain extent.
Which might also sometimes be a bit threatening. You know, you have the people in the business, they know what they do. They're the experts, they are proud of what they do, they want to get their job done. And here comes a topic people are not familiar with, and it's a bit creepy. You maybe watch a video, a movie, but what is it really that you can actually see? And basically, a lot of times it's just considered a cost and not really making sure that you can do the business.
It seems to me that it's very much the challenge is about translating technical cyber risks and threats into the language of money, impact and reputation, the language of business. And that perhaps is something that boards have grappled with, because suddenly you get something that threatens your business's bottom line that doesn't look like a traditional threat to the bottom line and maybe hasn't been translated into business terms. And so I wanted to ask you, Suzanne, because in terms of cyber, often in companies being a transformation, a change management process, how do you get people to understand it in those terms? And how do you get them to see, because you spoke about not seeing it just as a cost, how do you get them to feel like they're empowered?
I think there's, in my opinion, the first approach is to know your people. You need to understand who you're working with and what they're doing, because they will do everything to get the job done. And whatever you put up there, if you put too many barriers, it's just people gonna go around it. So I think important is that you really know who your people are and who is working for you. I mean, making sure that actually everyone is working in your favor. That's another topic, but we won't even go that line. But in general, I think it's big part is awareness. People don't want to make the mistakes. They don't want to be the one to actually hit the phishing email and invite some hacker into the company. So I really think awareness, but the awareness needs to be in a way that people can understand it. You know?
So translating it again for them.
Yes.
And do you, and how, I mean, a lot of security awareness training trainings have been done over the past 10, 20 years. There is a growing body of people that's saying it's not enough. Why do you think that it's typically not working? Is it because in your view, it hasn't been translated into other people's pain points? Or is there something else that's behind it?
I think there's multiple reasons. One definitely is the question, is it a tick the box exercise of my company? I think that's usually the worst you can actually do, because it's not just cyber that people are getting trained on, it's tons of other governance and compliance issues that you get trained on. But I really think it's the question really comes from, do you understand your people and the motivation for them to work? And the moment you understand what motivates people to work, I think you can also make them be part of it. Again, you know, people, your staff wants to make the business happening. That's what they want to do. And in general, that's if the business is, if cyber is not on the board topic, cyber is not making the business happen. You know, so I think if you have a clear indication that the prevention of, like, I don't know, if you say whatever we did, 12 months, no attacks or no attacks that actually were successful, here is your reward. Here is what you get from it. Here is your encouragement.
So using positive psychology rather than making people feel like that cliche, the weakest link, which I'm sure we can all agree is a little bit outdated now and perhaps is not the most constructive way forward.
Can I jump in also to answer your question in a slightly different way to what Suzanne said? So I think what needs to be done, and that has to do with what you said earlier, Andreas, you said we had a sudden change towards more digital transformation with the onset of the pandemic, right? In my view, we had digital transformation ongoing for the last 20 years. However, it went, bit by bit, very slowly, like this, this example of the frog in the hot water, who, doesn't jump out because so slowly it, in my view, a lot of the risk management or basic risk management tasks, they actually would have to been redone or done differently, or the whole business would have had to be looked at in a different way, because all of a sudden, you know, you had transformed parts of your processes, you had your data in, you know, in databases, then the databases were in the cloud, then you had cloud outside of your own jurisdiction, and all of that, with including a changing environment, like laws and regulations changing all the time. I think that created a very unstable basis for people to do their risk management. And I think in terms of, you know, understanding really what is the risk of a company, and how that translates then also to the people working there who make that, you know, risk less, or you know, can support the business and avoid or mitigate those risks. I think that is something that needs to be taken really seriously, and that is not so easy, because assessing cyber risk within a company is not a trivial task. And I think this is also maybe one of the reasons why we're here where we are. I know what you think about that.
Well, I wanted to pick up on that last point about, you know, how it is so difficult to do it internally. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about the importance of public-private partnerships as a way of building knowledge around this challenging area. Can you speak a little bit about some of the initiatives that might be taking place in Switzerland around that?
In terms of public-private partnership, that's more on the kind of what do we do now kind of side of things, not in the assessment side or understanding, I think, but there are some good initiatives that have been kicked off. One is the FSCSE, that's a financial sector cybersecurity center, which is a public-private partnership in Switzerland of the, obviously, financial services sectors, so banks, insurers are part of that. I think that is a good and honest way to increase communication between the different players, prepare for large events, help each other out, share best practices, all these kind of things. It's brand new. It's only been operational since a couple of months or so. So we still have to see how it then really develops and what the impact is. But I'm putting a lot of hope actually in these kind of public-private partnerships. It's also a collaboration with the Swiss National Cybersecurity Center. So there should be a good handshake there. That makes a difference. There are other public-private partnerships. There is a national testing institute that is being built up in the canton of Zug, where Switzerland's capability to actually test components will be fostered, so that companies also can actually understand what kind of components they use, how that then adds to their cyber exposure potentially, or to whether they are kind of safe in a way, right? So there's multiple things ongoing in Switzerland, watching the space, and I'm actually quite optimistic there as well that we are doing steps into the right direction.
Maybe Andreas, do you have any views on what we are seeing increasingly now? I mean, it's not very widespread, but this idea that companies could band together and form sort of collective defense approaches. So they rally together. So rather than have each individual business fighting or using, offensive capabilities or defensive capabilities, that you then bring expertise across businesses together and join forces. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we see that quite a lot happening now. There are all these initiatives popping up here and there, and I think that's it's a very interesting approach, and it goes in the right direction. What I think is we need it even on a higher macro level. we talked about the public and private partnerships and the cooperation. I think what the industry is still lacking are certain standards that somehow are established as these standards. You know, there are some scorings, and we know of a lot of companies out there, market participants of ours, as well as state organizations or state closed organizations that are developing at the moment kind of standards, be it risk scores, be it minimum requirements. You know, the whole critical infrastructure topic goes in the same direction, but we're not there yet, right? There are good initiatives left and right. The time is running, and we aren't there yet. So I think we are all looking for that big step that allows us to have standards in place, which won't be the solution, not to be misunderstood. You know, it's not that we have a standard and if you fulfill a certain score, you're going to be cyber secure. That's not the point. But it is kind of a map, and it allows companies to have a certain kind of orientation, be it who's the right vendor for me, what is the minimum what is the benchmark across my industry, what are others doing? And and that topic, what you just mentioned, actually fits right in there. So what are my competitors doing? When it comes to cybersecurity, I don't think we are in a competition amongst market participants. We are in a situation to help each other to protect us. I mean, we're getting asked by governments very often that, we support them with our analysis and our data exactly because of that reason. They want to see and understand how over time the standards and the security situation in certain industries develop. When a regulator asks you month by month for certain data, then obviously they want to see that in that particular industry, the standards are getting higher. So, there's also pressure and demand from that side. And I think it is the right time now to sit together, be it amongst the industries, be it within an industry, together with a regulator, with and also on an international level, because we're not fighting a national or regional enemy, we're fighting a global enemy.
Right. I mean, the World Economic Forum recently released a briefing on systemic cybersecurity risk, and I know, Maya, you are one of the contributors to this. And it really shows how the technology and the cybersecurity landscape is really very interdependent and connected. And therefore, and you talked earlier, Maya, about how it doesn't necessarily mean that if you may not have a direct attack, but there may be an attack on one of your vendors in your supply chain. And I think the fact that, for example, I think it was in either 2021 or earlier this year, there was a supermarket in Sweden that was affected by a cybersecurity attack that had happened on a provider in Florida in the US. So it speaks, it seems, as you're talking about, Andreas, to this need for a greater collaboration and sharing of knowledge against an increasing threat surface and a sort of existential crisis that's really, or existential problems that are posed to us. What would you say about can you offer something in relation to the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Cybersecurity and its findings in that report?
Well, first of all, yeah, I agree. I mean, but on the negative side, we've been talking, I think, for the past 10 years, we've been talking about that. I've seen very, very little progress. I mean, there is little steps that you see. There is the UN working group, etc. So there is, and there are some outcomes. So you see some also privately initiated agreements that are out there where companies and government officials, etc., assign to the Paris call, for example, is such a kind of agreement where people voluntarily sign up to certain principles. I think there is some progress. Do I see kind of the huge, big global international solution at the somewhere close by? No. What is also in this report, though, is some very practical things that that can also be done on a national level, and some basically needs on a national level that go beyond that kind of international broad picture. One of them is being prepared. I think the FSCSC that I mentioned earlier is one part for the Swiss financial services sector to be prepared for the Big Bang, right? What do we do if it really happens?
So let me ask you, what should a company be already doing and having in place to prepare for that when, not if scenario?
Okay, well, on a company level, I was talking now on a kind of national kind of economic level.
Sure, please.
There is also a different, on a company level, that's obviously a lot smaller, but nevertheless very, very important. So one of the things, and I'm sure you can chip in here, one of the things is being prepared. And I'm convinced you can't prepare for the exact event, but you need to be prepared nevertheless, right? And you need to be prepared for something to happen. So you have to have, certain scenarios in place. You have to have your plans in place. You need to know, I mean, some of the scenarios are very obvious. If you get hit by a ransomware and all your computers are, all your data is encrypted, and you can't basically send emails anymore. You can't use your phone anymore because it's a voice over IP phone. Then you have to have you have to a plan how to communicate, who does what's the governance,
and it needs to be printed. That plan
that needs to be there, right?
Can't be downloadable from your
you might
system.
have to have, it might have to
sitting
have
in the cloud.
So there is these things. So is you have to be prepared. You have to have the people that know what to do, which is kind of a nice style pass for you.
Exactly. It's and I think printed is not even sufficient. You shouldn't just have it on paper. I mean, how do we learn? By reading? Seriously? No, by doing. We need to have tabletop exercise is great, but why not do a little bit more testing like this?
So simulations.
Simulations, simulate with your team. I mean, we do fire drills where we leave the building. I mean,
exactly. I mean, if I look at the top of the room, and the audience obviously can't see it now, but there is a fire alarm. Why? Because it's a law that there's a fire alarm, and if I leave the room, and then there's an emergency exit plan, and then there is a space outside where everybody meets so that they can count that everybody's there, and you need to have backups in other buildings, and there's a business continuity plan in place. And that business continuity plan refers to the physical danger of a fire. Now we talk about the digital world. There must be the continuity plan in place for a digital breakdown. It's kind of similar with a fire. So where is the digital fire alarm? Whom do I call? We know whom to call when it burns. Whom do you call? How do they act? Where do they find your plan? Because what is the firefighter doing? In the fire truck, they pull out a piece of paper, and they will exactly know where they find the water in the house, and they will know everything. So they come here, they know how to act, they will react fast, they try to avoid that the other houses on the left and the right start burning, and so on. We all know that. And we need something exactly like that in the digital world, right? And very often, I mean, I see so many companies, very often that is not in place.
It's really interesting you mentioned this fire analogy, because I've often thought of that too, that we have these signs printed on most building internal buildings, where to go, what to do exactly if there is such a crisis. But I'm sure we've all been in buildings when the fire alarm has gone off, and everyone sits around in the meeting and sort of looks at each other and goes, well, should we pay attention to this or not? Should we interrupt our meeting or not? And I've often wondered, what does it take to encourage the person in the organization who is the person that sticks up their hand and says, hey, listen, the fire alarm is going off. We should actually take notice of this, because this is an indication that something is going wrong. And I wonder, thinking about why a lot of traditional cybersecurity awareness doesn't work, is also because we send conflicting messages in our organizations. And one of the messages that I hear time and time again in organizations is, don't come to me with a problem unless you have a solution as well. And that obviously will shoot yourself in the foot when it comes to cybersecurity, because we want people to say, hey, listen, I think I may have clicked on a phishing link, or you know what, I need to tell you that my line manager consistently leaves their computer unlocked when they leave their desk, or whatever it is. And I just wondered, maybe Suzanne, you working very closely with people across the business, do you agree that a speak up culture, you know, this culture that, hey, if you see something, you say something so we can sort it. Do you agree that that is necessary in the wider organizational context for us to have better cyber practices, such as, you know, if we hear the cyber equivalent fire alarm go off, we actually take notice and do something?
I think it's simply fundamental. Because again, you know, we talked about the weakest link. So if you're, let's say, a normal employee somewhere, and you're the one who actually clicked on that button on the email, do you really go and say tell that to someone? But honestly, even the CEO who had the bank account changed in the back, which was not his order, too embarrassed to actually tell that he was exposed to exactly the same thing like everybody else. Because again, we try to work, we try to do our best, and here we go, we make the mistake. And I think if a lot of times I find, yeah, you're okay to make a mistake, but actually when you do make a mistake, you're hit on the head. So what is really that, what do we call this error, like error okayness? What is okay? Where is it okay to actually be wrong? Where is it okay to make the mistakes? And I often think that's not, there's no culture there, like that is where it's clear, this is not an error, this is actually making sure that we can prevent worse.
Right, because it gives you an opportunity to address it. Andrea, did you want to?
The individual employee is actually not the weakest part in the whole value chain. But there is a phishing email, and you know, these phishing emails are pretty good these days. And when we simulate, when we do awareness trainings and we send out these phishing mails, of course we create them in a way that people don't. But I think sending out phishing emails in an awareness campaign is not the solution to the problem. That's the one thing. And B, the person who clicks on it is definitely not the weakest link. Because if you click on the link, which then would allow the attacker to reach sensitive data in a, not from that individual but generic sensitive data of the company, including the diamond in the heart of the company, then the mistake was done by someone else, but definitely not by that individual. And that culture, I agree, needs to change. You know, finger pointing on that person, and that person doesn't dare to tell anyone that they clicked on the person. I mean, we're talking a lot in the industry about the zero trust environment, right? In that context, it's totally misunderstood that there is a zero trust to the individual employee. Zero trust needs to be an overall topic for an organization, looking outside in the interaction with other parties, but not necessarily with the individual employee. I mean, I think the problem starts somewhere different. So, yeah, I agree. It's a cultural and a fundamental thing. I give you an example. We just had a situation when we found a critical vulnerability in one of the biggest mid-cap companies in this country, and we actually, in a video call, showed it to the IT security responsible person. It was not the CISO, but it was a different person. We showed him, look, we can, with this click and that, we can actually access sensitive data. I mean, with his allowance, obviously he said, yeah, show me. So a couple of weeks later, I met, through a coincidence, the CFO of the same company. And, you know, we didn't get the deal with him, fine. But the thing is, he didn't use the information I gave him to report. He rather didn't tell anyone because he felt, well, that's an assumption, but he somehow felt like if I take that information, that someone, a third party who he interacted with, found something, and he would tell it to his boss, then he would be in trouble. Mm. You know, what kind of risk culture is that? Mm-hmm. If you feel you can't tell your boss about a critical vulnerability that is obviously there, and that's it is a cultural thing. It starts with the culture. I think it's inside a company. It starts with regulation and rules on the outside, and it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I think that was a rhetoric question, right? On that the culture that we want.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think we all agree on that.
The culture often starts at the top, doesn't it? So, I mean, I think it really starts with those at the board level and then senior management. What can a board do to kind of encourage that culture, which ultimately will enhance cyber resilience? What are some of the things that board members can do in dealing with cyber risk to encourage that kind of a culture?
Can I let the others answer first?
So,
sure,
I can speak from what I would expect actually to see. It's walk the talk, and also walk the talk in the sense of show their vulnerability, explain that, hey, I'm part of the same boat as everybody else, show how serious they are taking it, and I think with that encourage all your employees to take cyber resilience serious, to bring up the stories, to let them know, to maybe invite for a discussion around it. I'm sure also the employees have good valuable points where they can tell you, hey, but I think this is actually not so secure, kind of like invite for that discussion, not just wait until hopefully someone is actually coming to you and telling you about it, but really open that discussion. And maybe the first 2-3 times you don't get much feedback, but I actually think like over time, if you engage with your employees, you will get the feedback. And then, of course, you have the worst is kind of like the people that always have an issue, that always bring up the bad thing. Don't shut them down. Like, make sure that they're listened to and give an answer. If everything's under control, there is a story that it is under control. And you should have that story. So you should be able to actually do those people that are always seeing the glass empty or half empty. You should actually be capable, in my opinion, as a senior leadership team, you should, board or executives, whatever, you should be capable of doing that. And then actually you have those that maybe don't speak up that often, and listen to them and consider, okay, what does it mean? What does it really mean? Can we do something? And then also show it that you did something based on user impact, like on your employees' contribution.
Andreas, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. Lead by example. I mean, exactly, show that vulnerability. I think creating a risk culture where you clearly show that part of risk is of importance to the organization, to you as a management, to you as a board, that you take that topic serious, that you incentivize people to be aware of risks, to identify potential risks in their field, to report these risks and not feel guilty for risks that have been done in the past, but incentivize them to be happy, to be even proud of finding a risk. It's not about finger pointing and blaming others. It's about finding a risk that might harm the overall company and the overall system and infrastructure. And at the end of the day, everybody in the company. If you manage to create that culture that people jointly feel responsible for the security, and which channel you use, there are various channels, how to report risks to the responsible people. We have, in many industries, we have these so-called whistleblower hotlines. There it is always about how do people interact with each other. And I think it's a very, very good development that we have these whistleblower hotlines. But you could develop something similar there, not finger pointing to others, but being purely focused on the content. There is a risk to our infrastructure that might harm our systems. Identify that, you show it to someone, and then you need to show the people that you take what you found serious, and that measures are taken to reduce that specific risk. You need to give feedback to the people and tell your employees, look, found that, understood, thanks for reporting it to us, we took the following measures. And then you create a positive feedback loop, a positive atmosphere of risk awareness and risk reduction willingness.
How can you incentivize that kind of behavior? So you spoke about, not just don't punish it, but incentivize it. And I wonder, could people, could they be promoted? Could it be a point in their promotion system? Could it be that they're rewarded with some kind of employee benefit? I mean, how do you incentivize that kind of behavior beyond walking the talk?
Well, now we're moving into the field of managing people, and that's at the end of the day, how do you incentivize people generally? There are various ways of how to incentivize people. I mean, I'm not talking about a monetary bonus, but there is like, if you transfer responsibility and say like, this is the responsible person in the department X, Y, Z, and the one thing is to positively motivate people by saying like, if you identify risks, then this is getting rewarded in a certain way, whichever way it is. You know, some people like the monetary part, others like a day off or whatever it is. So the one thing is clearly to incentivize them and to give them the possibility to prove that they take it serious. Obviously, there's the other part of the same coin that you say, as part of the goals for a year, everybody has to have fulfill certain risk standards. But it's a very, very thin line, you know, between the one and the other world. Because if you start saying like the maximum mistakes you're allowed to do is
becomes arbitrary too.
Exactly, you all of a sudden create an environment of fear. So you have to be very sensitive with putting that as a goal in the annual feedback. So, but you can touch that point.
I think I've even forgotten my original question.
So maybe just from my side, and I'm speaking now for supervisory boards, right? Not management boards. A lot of the I think measures that we've discussed now is more for the management board. If I take one step back and look from my experience on supervisory boards, is there you are not, you're not managing the organization. But what you can do, for example, and I think that lines up very nicely with what you just said, Andreas, is you can make sure that the incentives that are set are not the wrong ones. That you do not set incentives so that risks get higher, that people kind of are incentivized to do the wrong thing. I think that is one important thing. The other thing is I think in terms of walking the talk, I think it's important that the supervisory board also takes an interest in this topic. Cyber risk, I think, is in terms of the culture, is not so much different from other risks. You want a risk culture, which is, in the whole company, that, where people can talk about it, where they can be open, where they can, also admit that they have done something, wrong, and don't get killed for it. So I don't think that is, very special in cyber. You want the overall. I mean, there are other risks that are, way more kind of delicate in the organization. You want a risk culture, I think, and that's not. But in terms of what walking the talk and having a kind of conversation with the organization, I think it's important that the supervisory board knows the CISO, that they have a conversation, that the CISO also knows there is an interest there, that they can come with things directly, that there is a direct open kind of communication channel there, that there is an interest in the topic, because in my experience, having for years and years and years, having been seen as the cybersecurity kind of bunch, and please excuse my maybe overly generalization here, as kind of the kind of weirdos, or the strange people who talk about risk all the time and are very, very technical, etc. Sometimes that image can be in the organization. And I think here, what we talked about earlier, that comes in, that everybody needs to do their part, right? And then at some point there needs to be a translation between people who do, for example, operational defense and are very in the detail, to what does it mean for the company? Where do we have a real risk, and what does it mean in terms of Swiss franc or US dollar or euro in the end, if that happens? And what does it mean to our customers? What does it mean to our suppliers? What does it mean to our shareholders? And I think this is where then the And if it all comes together, where the organization and the different bodies in the organization and the whole governance needs to play together to make it a working framework or working thing, the whole risk management.
Absolutely.
I know whether that was
which
clear.
I would add to that. I think that's how it gives a purpose. You know, if you only look at your little desk and you actually create a culture where everybody just looks at their desk, I think that's when you have the vulnerabilities. But actually, if you can say, well, let's look at it from an end-to-end perspective, it's a full part of the company, and you can translate that for everyone sitting in front of their computer or doing whatever. I actually think that's where it becomes tangible also for the employee. It becomes tangible for every process. And I think that's where you need to go. You need to make sure people understand, while you might crunch your numbers, there is a cyber threat which is as important for the company as your numbers. And I think that's how, again, you give the purpose to the people to actually be ready to do it. And I just find the purpose usually motivates to actually also do the right thing and also speak when you realize, oh, something didn't go the way it should have.
I fully agree with that. And there was a study done over 4 years by a journalist who's written a book called The Culture Code, looking at what makes the world's most successful companies. And he indeed found that purpose is absolutely essential, one of the 3 fundamental requirements, that people buy into a narrative. And when we look at, in terms of changing people's behavior, how to change people's user behavior, if you try to change anybody's behavior, it's really about the story they buy into. You know, what motivates them to change? If it's not a short-term reward, it's the long-term story that they buy into. And if it is the story about, yeah, I might be crunching numbers, but if I understand that what I'm doing is part of a bigger picture and how that fits into the bigger picture of the business, and how, if I'm not able to do it because a cyber attack prevents me from doing that, then that then has a flow-on effect. So how do we, practically speaking, what does a user-focused point of view look like in an organization?
I think for me, it comes back to what I said at the beginning. You need to know your people. You need to understand the processes and how they work. And then actually you can engage with them and also have that, what you mentioned before, like to walk the talk. You know, if you as a board or as a leadership team, you walk away from your people because you actually, they are numbers on a spreadsheets, but you actually don't even understand what their value is or what their skills are and what skills they don't have. Then I think it's very difficult to actually engage all these people. So I think that's, for me, it's quite important that you understand who are your people that work for you, that work with you. And that sometimes, of course, in bigger companies, that might be more difficult than in smaller companies. But then again, I think that's just super important. And of course, it's a delegation question. I mean, it's again, you can't know, if you're a 10,000 people company, you can't know each and everyone. But still, I think there is an obligation that you know your people, you know what they're capable of and where they struggle, and that you actually encourage them and enable them to do their job while being aware of the other risks that are around there.
Anyone else want to add anything?
I think one of the things that we bringing that back to, for example, a cyber event, right? Then you're in crisis mode, and I think this is I think what Susan says resonates with me very strongly. If the crisis mode is on for 2 days, that's fine. But very often, the crisis goes on, and you said, what, 22 days?
22 days, yeah.
That's kind of the median or the average.
Yep.
So it's, it might be on for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months or longer. Usually you have kind of a smallish cybersecurity team, right? That you have a few shoulders where most of the work sits on, some people who are involved then in everything. that is a huge stretch on some people. That's, you know, it's human beings. It's they have a family too, and they have, you know, they have a maximum amount of kind of capacity, and they need to sleep at some point in time. I think that is something that we very often tend to forget or you know, disregard, probably. And I think here is what Susan says: know your people, know their, you know, what they actually can do, and be able to plan for such events and contingencies. I think that is super important.
Full agreement.
No, it reminds me of, I think it was maybe 2 years ago during the height of the pandemic. There was an incident at HBO, you know, the big American TV production company. And it sort of made it to Twitter, became viral. They had an intern who'd recently joined, and he'd sent out a systems configuration email test that was supposed to just go internally, but they had a glitch in their system, and it actually ended up going out to all of basically everyone on in their contacts, external clients and so forth. And instead of using it as an opportunity to say, hey, we've just been given a fantastic opportunity to plug this gap, instead it was blamed on the intern and went viral on Twitter. And HBO came out and said, don't worry, it's all under control, and it was just the intern. And I think it highlights the importance of understanding that, firstly, having a speak up culture, making people feel like they're safe and they're going to survive making a mistake. And in fact, understanding that it's part of learning and an opportunity for the company to address something before it actually becomes a much bigger problem. It also speaks to, I think, the points that you were making, Suzanne, and you just picked up on, Maya, and which you wholeheartedly agreed with, Andreas, about understanding that there's a human behind this. And I think we often forget in cybersecurity that really it's the human at the center of all of this. It's the human who may have launched the attack, to the human who may have clicked on a phishing scam, to the human whose data is breached, not to mention the humans who are then going to clean up the crisis. And I think there's a tendency working in the tech space to think that, you know, the software eats world approach just fixes everything. But we have to understand that there's a human behind all of this. And how can we capacitate people to better engage in cybersecure behaviors? How can we capacitate our teams to be able to deal with the contingencies and the crises, let alone the everyday events? So I think it really highlights the need for a human-centric approach to cybersecurity. We are almost at the hour, if not on. Are there any further final thoughts before we go and take some questions from the audience that you want to add with respect to the role that boards can play, or business senior executives can play in a business in terms of enhancing a company's cyber resilience?
I think actually one point that we haven't picked up yet is the role of the company strategy in all of this, right? Because if we are looking at risk management, you can avoid, you can mitigate, you can transfer, and you can accept your risks. I think if we are specifically looking at supervisory boards, especially in Switzerland, where you also define the strategy of and agree to the strategy of a company, then it's important that the board is aware that each and every strategic decision nowadays has some sort of impact on the vulnerability, on the exposure of the company, because each and every strategic decision has an impact on the data or on whatever. Might be a decision, you know, we want to go into a new product line, might be we want to go into, you know, a new market, customers all of a sudden from European Union. Then you are all of a sudden in a completely different environment. And I think having the awareness of the impact that those strategic decisions have, not only on the opportunities, but also on the risk side, that is an important thing. Having said that, it's also, I think, a good thing to think about, a specifically safe and secure products and services that you can offer as a strategic asset rather than only a risk topic or a cost. So these are my 2 points that I would like to add.
Yeah, I think the strategic point is a very interesting, a very valid one. It's a corporate strategy element. Wherever you expand to, be it vertically, be it horizontal, whenever you do a transaction, you M&A transaction, whether you cooperate with a new vendor, that always needs to be an element of it. You need to allocate resources to that factor, and it's not a one point in time issue, right? Cyber threat is not going to go away. It's the same for penetration testing. So many companies out there, they think you do a penetration test once a year and you're going to be safe for the rest of the year. And then a year later, you do it again. Being part of the company's strategy, cybersecurity means it needs to be a continuous element of your doing. It's a daily topic. And it needs to be a daily topic. It needs to have enough management attention. It needs to be an element of your daily doing, of your risk culture, what we discussed earlier. And if you have it in that ecosystem, in that combination, and I think you can be prepared. And I think you said earlier, it's not a question of whether you're going to be attacked or not. The question is when. And I agree on that. And when it happens, then you need to prepare and properly react. So that changing it from I look into it once and then I leave it because it's painful. No, it needs to be a bit the part of your daily life as a corporation. It's like brushing your teeth. You need to have cybersecurity there. It needs to be present all the time. And I think then this felt threat and that element of fear. I mean, there's still too much fear in our industry. There's still too many people talking about fear because it's so new and it's so difficult to touch. But I think when we change that from the fear element to the awareness element and to implementing it into our daily living as companies as well as as individuals, then I think we are on the right path.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's a bit like the fitness exercise. You don't just go once to the fitness room a year. I mean, if you do, then maybe you will not run the 10K 3 months later as well. And I also think that makes it simpler for the people. If it is a DNA talk, like if you're working on getting your employees to engage in that or to have it as a DNA on a daily business, I think then you get that resilience. I think you get that much better embedded in your daily work. And I think what we also touched on before, at the very beginning, it's not going to happen overnight. That change for actually being fit as a company in the cyber space, I think it's something that needs work, and you can't just do it once. You have to actually set your targets, define where you want to go, what risk do you want to take and what risk do you not want to take, and then you can actually work towards it.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to check about the questions that we have coming in. So I'll just move them over to the side here. So question about whether there is sufficient awareness about who critical third parties are.
That is a super question. And I think it depends. This is probably a very lawyerly answer, but it all depends. I think some companies have way over 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 third parties like vendors that do some sort of deliver some sort of service or product and that is needed. Now, I think finding out who the really critical vendors are, where nothing can go wrong, and what kind of supply chains they actually have. So you also have a view on the vendors that supply those vendors. I think that is a very difficult but very necessary exercise. I think for smaller companies, usually it's a bit easier. Smaller companies operating maybe in one country, having a more rounded profile. It's just the sheer size of vendors of a multinational with numerous, countries where there's production or there's offices, etc. Is difficult to oversee from one point. But yeah, I think it's a good question, and it needs to be done. Third-party due diligence, third-party overview of where your vendors are, what do they do, what is their cyber hygiene, what's their cyber maturity, is if they are connected in some way to your network. So
and prioritize with those that you absolutely can't afford something to go wrong with. That would
very, very important question.
Yeah, I think there is no trustful vendor. I mean, why would you trust company A towards company B? I mean, you need to have your own criteria that your vendor needs to fulfill. If we look into the TISAX certification in the car industry, there is a standard which, requires vendors into the car industry to fulfill certain standards. Whether they are high enough or not, it's a different topic. But I think you need to define your own criteria. Whom are you interacting with? Whom are you sharing data and systems with? And what are the criteria they need to fulfill to interact with you digitally? And you need to apply all these criteria to all your third-party contacts. So I don't think you can ex ante trust or mistrust anyone. You're talking about zero trust again. I don't think you should trust anyone outside the organization who wants to interact with you.
Becomes quite challenging though, doesn't it, when you might have a business requirement for engaging with a particular vendor, which may be on a cost basis or a cost decision, and then enforcing certain standards or making sure that meets certain standards. And I guess it comes back to the points we were discussing earlier about having everybody understand the value of a particular part of the business and what that represents in terms of the cost if there was a cyber incident that would take that down. Suzanne, do you want to add to the question about third parties?
I totally agree on the complexity. I think, your direct third parties may be manageable, even if there's a lot. But I mean, with whom they are working, are they disclosing everything to you? Do they apply the same standards as you apply? Yes, you certainly hope so. And I really think it's what also Maya said before, it's a prioritization. You need to understand where your bigger vulnerabilities are. Doesn't mean that you don't need to take care of the rest as well, but you need to figure out how you can prioritize.
So we also have a question about, the EU's DORA, the recent Resilience Act for the financial services industry, and the Basel Committee Principles on Operational Resilience. Sorry, it's the same person giving some background. They look at ICT vendors as critical. And that's the interesting thing about DORA, the recent legislation from the EU, or proposed legislation, that it also peculiarly expands to third-party vendors who may not be in the financial services industry, but if they're providing products and services to a player in the financial services industry, they are therefore still caught by the legislation.
I think that's an interesting topic. And if you compare, we've got fintech companies as clients, and we've got old economy financial services companies as clients. And so if you compare it, and you can't generalize it, of course, but you would figure that a fintech that just starts digitally and is purely digital would be way better protected, or maybe be more aware of the risk, because for them it is a very digital risk, right? They'll be immediately out of business. And but you can't generalize it. Some of them are very well protected, others aren't. And then the same for the old economy financial services companies, right? I mean, they have the urge now to digitalize elements. I mean, which client out there, we're talking about the generation change again. If you're talking about the next generation, you think there's any client of a bank who would accept a financial services provider without a proper online banking solution, or the interaction with the banker through any digitalized. So for them, the challenge to digitalize old elements of their value chain it is there, and then if you digitalize that and you have your old structures, then that might also lead to the fact that the risks are all of a sudden bigger than with a digital fintech. So it's, you can't say the one one part of the industry is better than the others only because they're digital or not. So it's an interesting question, but it is, I think it is a topic of relevance for both parties or both sides of the industry.
Absolutely, and also I think, to your point, Andreas, it becomes really challenging with legacy systems as well. When you through merger and acquisition, whatever you inherit, you're also inheriting risk depending on the systems and the risk that's involved in those systems, isn't it? So,
yeah, I talked to an IT responsible person of one of the big Swiss banks lately, and he said, "Do you think there's still someone in the bank who started the digital or the IT base of what it is there now?" There's no one. I mean, there's not a single person left who has a clue of how this house basically built. So that brings a lot of risks with it, of course.
One of the other questions that I think it's more of a comment that's come in, and I think probably we will all agree, talking about, so Javier Canon did an experiment where in his experience, he did an experiment asking end users for a free text definition of simple terms like malware, virus, without using Google. The outcome was a huge surprise. And in his humble opinion, we need to use more pedagogical methods and ask always for feedback again and again. Suzanne, do you want to speak about the use of how we teach people, the pedagogical methods, or do you want to talk about involving people? I think that's an interesting experiment to ask people, what do you understand to mean malware or a virus, especially people not working in traditional IT
yes,
areas.
I think it's again that feedback discussion. It's more the discussion. I think whenever you teach someone something, then usually it means you have understood it. So I think it's always a good way to teach, to make someone else teaching you back. I think that's a bit that's definitely valuable. Again, the question is, how do people learn? And I think there, teach. I used to have a boss who was teaching me all the time. I hated it, believe me. So it was more kind of like this engagement. For me, I think it's really a little bit how we see that teaching. It's, you can't just show the videos. You can't just show the presentations. You need to have that feedback loop that person can actually respond. And I think it's an interesting idea to have people explain what they understand with malware, because they hear it all the time. But I guess in the company, be aware of malware, and then nobody actually knows. Probably if I would ask my mother also, she also wouldn't know.
Can I offer a wish here? I mean, for us, and that comes from a place where, I mean, we've been talking about businesses today, right? But if we're looking at the topic, it's relevant for any sort of organization, plus for everybody of us as well. Yes. So my wish actually would be that we would start teaching children in kindergarten, and then continue teaching in primary school and through high school and everything, so that these concepts and the basic understanding is basically understood and lived, rather than after the fact we come and in a business context we teach them some behaviors, right? And I think that is, I wish we would be more proactive as a society and start with these topics way earlier, because everybody is confronted with these topics. All the children are confronted, almost all, except for the few that don't have a smartphone at the age of whatever. There you go.
Lower and lower.
And so I think we have also a societal obligation to teach
and it may
our
be actually,
children, and they grow into more knowledgeable potentially.
It might actually be like, I think that's also an interesting topic, for maybe some of us at the table, you know, we didn't have the computers when we studied, or they were just new. But now the kids, they actually have, at least at the age of 8, I would say, they have their first smartphone, and yeah, maybe it's not connected to the internet at the beginning, or maybe you start slow, but that's also nice, you know, they actually can grow into it. I think there hopefully will be a different understanding of the entire technology topic, and cyber being one of it.
I'm asking myself, honestly, you are way more optimistic than I am there, because if they are not taught, I don't know how they would grow into it.
So we started a project 3 months ago in Germany. We cooperate with a big digital education company, and we literally go from school to school now to teach young kids awareness. It's an awareness training for kids.
Why do you do that in Germany, not in Switzerland, Andreas?
Well, we need to start somewhere, and that education startup is based in Germany. So that's where we started, and it's a question of resources how to roll it out. But my experience is, and that's interesting, if we're trying to get an analogy to the corporate world, being parents and teaching your kids. I mean, there's one stage when, you know, they'll take bigger steps in the digital world than you do. You know, we all think in that Facebook world, you know, that next generation, they're somewhere else, you know, that for them, Facebook, and look at the statistics, right? I mean, the biggest group where Facebook loses members, clients, whatever you want to call it, is at the age below 20. And the biggest growing group is above 60. That shows you the reality about Facebook. And so they communicate through different channels, and you'll keep up with that for a while, but then you'll lose. And so the role of parents telling their kids, you know, about the dangers in the digital world is the one thing, but creating awareness needs to come from a different source as well. So making the kids aware of the risks they are facing when they communicate with each other in the digital world, because you know, you're not gonna stop that. That's, I mean, and I don't think we should stop it, but you know, that's the one thing is for sure, that generation after us communicate differently than we do, and we communicate differently than our parents. And I think it's wrong to challenge the next generation. I keep on hearing that challenge, like, you know, I saw these kids sitting in the bus and they were all looking into their iPhone. Well, yes, because that's the way they communicate, whether we like it or not. You know, we used to write letters, and we've been on a landline and talk to each other.
Because we didn't have smartphones.
I agree, and that's exactly the point. And then the generation beforehand, they sent the mailman on a horse from one village to the other. You know, and every generation is probably challenging the next one. That why, you know, I remember my parents challenging me, well, you're on the landline for an hour. You know, and that goes on and on and on. So it's not about challenging them, saying like, why do you talk to each other? Yes, you know, there are elements why they should talk to each other, but we're not going to reduce the amount of communication happening through these devices. So the only thing is like, and I think the worst thing you can do is not allowing your kids to communicate it that way, because they're going to do it secretly. So the creation of awareness is a very important part of educating your kids, but it also needs other third parties out there, including the schools, by the way, including the schools, including the gaming industry, including the communication platforms, to educate kids about the dangers in that world. And that is creating awareness. And that's I mean, we can do another podcast on that topic, because it is so important to generate at an early age that kind of awareness. And I fully agree. I mean, I think I had my first email address at the age of 18.
Yeah.
And if you look at the kids now, you know, at the age of 4, they take your cell phone and they enter the PIN, and you go like, how the hell do they know the PIN? Yeah. And you know, things like, we all had these experiences. So educating the next generation to create a new level of awareness and is very important.
Do you already have results from this trial in Germany?
Oh, I thought you were going to say with 7 minutes.
No. Well, yes. I mean, obviously, we don't track these kids. that would be a problem. But the feedback is phenomenal. The feedback is because, I mean,
so they're interested in that.
They're extremely interested. Anything around, you know, if you don't make a cell phone an enemy, and you know, I mean, how many teachers and parents say this is a devil device.
And we know that fear breeds ignorance. And
Absolutely.
I think also in the cybersecurity space, and I wonder how much of the encouraging or trying to spark awareness in children, as it is also in board members, majority of whom might be generation above ours, whether it's also about sparking curiosity. And so it's not just about telling what should or should not be, but inviting and encouraging curiosity around all of the potential risks of something, to understand it fully. So then I think with board members, perhaps it's let's do the cyber awareness training with a side of whiskey tasting or something. But I think it's important to speak the language of the audience to whom we're trying to change their behavior.
So I think, honestly, on small children, I think it's too early to ask them to be risk aware. Honestly, if you can teach them, certain things, but most of them are probably exact examples that work differently, but cannot, recognize the risk and not judge the risk. So I think that is too early, but it's not too early to teach them certain behaviors, right? As we teach our children to, eat properly and brush their teeth and whatnot. I think there are, valuable things to be taught at that age. And I think from a board member, you can expect that they understand risk and can estimate the risk, and they need, the information. And I would also expect from the management board to understand, what's the risk that our companies are facing. The supervisory board, the same thing. So I think you have a different, I think very different expectation on that, and I think you can actually with the right communication, and we are back in communication of what does it mean for the business. What does it mean for our future opportunities? What does it mean for our organization? I think that it's important that these conversations are being held.
Do you think that part of encouraging or growing awareness on the organizational level is also about having individuals understand how cyber hygiene is important in their own personal lives? So rather than getting people to learn about this stuff at work and just in the professional space, that we also sell it to them as, hey, this can benefit you in your personal life?
Probably.
I think it will depend on the person. Some people are very reluctant to get the personal life into the office, and they have, I think it's a bit a mentality question. You have areas where it's a no-go to actually have that interaction between personal life and business, and in other areas, yes, of course. Yeah. A lot of things you learn at the office in doing business, you might help you for your daily life, sure.
Or the other way around.
Exactly, yeah.
We have so many of these social engineering examples that clearly show you that in that context, private and professional life should be treated the same way. Why would you have a 16-digit password in the office, and then at home you use a five-letter one? It's like, so many of these cases, and we're coming back to the COVID situation, so many of these attacks happen through the private devices at home because they were not properly protected. So yes, I fully agree. You need to protect your own network as much as possible to a reasonable extent. And that's something that you can clearly learn from your experience at work, and to try to take that experience home and share it with your family. And we talked about educating kids, and coming back to your point, I just want to add that one. I think as soon as they start communicating themselves with digital devices, and as soon as they start online gaming, you need to start creating that awareness and educating them. And it doesn't actually matter how, it's basically your decision as parents, how soon they start communicating with these devices. But as soon as they do on their own, you need to create that awareness, because you're not gonna get them once that took on its own dynamics. So that's the point where you really need to sit down and explain.
Yeah, to me, it's almost like what you mentioned before, with brushing your teeth, you know, that we start when they're born, basically. So when the moment that you're old enough to hold the smartphones, you're old enough to consider a couple of things. Is you understand? Maybe not, but I would say, yes, there comes a responsibility with maturity as well. I think that's something you can I feel kids understand usually. And I actually would even say it's when they start to take pictures, you know, not even gaming, or as soon as they actually can take pictures. I mean,
Well, the parents take pictures and post them.
Yeah.
No comment on that. So one of the other questions that's come in is, in reality, business needs often overrule safer behaviours from a cyber risk or a CISO's aspect. So how do you try to strike the right balance? So when business needs are prioritized over safer behaviours, how do you strike the right balance? I think it goes back to what we were talking before about getting people to understand how what they do actually fits into the larger picture. And what
also what Maya said about the strategy, you know, what do you do? What do you want to, what risk do you want to take? I mean, if you climb the Matterhorn, most likely you'll take some security measures to go up there. And I think that's what you need to consider in any business decision you do. What is it that actually needs to go alongside to make sure you actually can meet your business needs? It doesn't help if you're just 10 meters from the top and actually you get hit.
So I think in an ideal world, you would, you know, also weigh that, you know, you define or kind of estimate what is the risk that we are facing if we are not implementing this security measure. I mean, I think one of the, you know, the access, you know, multi-factor authentication might be, you know, a business need to have, you know, very seamless and fast access, and you know, you don't want to, you know, have a second device or whatever, right? So I think here the question is, okay, what happens if, you know, you have an unauthorized access? What can happen? And in most cases, I would say that probably trumps the ease of access, right? So here I think it's important that this is understood, and there are very clear policies that are also being enforced, and that's just has to happen from top down, I think, and, you know, needs to be lived, needs to be implemented everywhere. But I think it's not always that easy to balance that. But I think this risk view of, you know, what is the risk if we're not doing the right thing, so to speak, is important also for people to then understand and agree that, you know, yes, I am doing this more cumbersome process because it just, you know, safeguards our crown jewels or whatever.
Did you want to add on that, Andreas?
Yeah, I think you need to apply a pragmatic approach. I fully agree with the two of you, and of course, the business, if there is a certain business need for something, then you need to basically find the balance between the risk and the return, if you want to call it that way. Of course, if there's a business need, then it needs to be done. I fully agree. Then again, you know, a business need has a certain urgency. Sometimes it does, yes, but you still can apply certain risk or security elements to it to at least define how fast you're going to react to a potential risk that comes out of that, whatever business need it is, and then take measures, you know, right afterwards, or as soon as possible afterwards. You know, attacks don't happen immediately. They don't happen overnight. You know, there is that, I don't know, sometimes people have that feeling that as soon as a vulnerability appears somewhere, be it in the darknet or in any other, you know, communication platform where they exchange ideas about vulnerabilities, it's not that the very next second you get attacked. So when there is a business need for something, then follow that business need. But immediately while you're following that business need, or right afterwards, think about the necessary risk measurements to reduce the risk of an attack thereafter.
Can I put one more onto that one? Because I think we are there once there is not a contra anymore, right? There's a business need versus a security need. But when the business need includes the need for security, I think, and then you don't have a discrepancy in your, I think it's a mindset thing.
Right,
But
so
yeah,
then
that is difficult to achieve, but that would be kind of, in my view, the ideal one.
Yeah.
I agree. So that's not then considered a zero-sum game, that it's not mutually exclusive. We can't, that it's not posited as just either a business decision or a security decision, but it's included.
Business decision includes the security requirements, basically. Yeah.
But as you were talking, I was thinking, and it goes to the last question that we've been asked about the panel's view on the best way to dissuade board members from viewing cyber risk management as a sunk cost. And when you were speaking about, the importance of considering policies and having policies in place around security, and then taking those into consideration, or following those, adhering to those when making a decision on something for the business. I'm thinking from my own experiences, and very often what I've seen in various organizations is you may well have those policies in place, but they're very often, particularly by boards or those at the senior levels, perhaps dismissed or not fully adhered to, perhaps not even taken into consideration when there's a very demanding, urgent business decision to be made. So I wonder, for perhaps a very practical question for a CISO presenting before a board, and perhaps trying to dissuade the board from taking a particular decision, let's say, for hypothetical sake, trying to dissuade the board from taking on a particular vendor, or perhaps from not implementing a new technology that they want to, that the business wants to implement. What would be your recommendations for how to persuade the board to see security? I mean, we've talked a little bit about how often there is a generational gap, or there is perhaps a lack of appreciation of the true cost of doing business in this cyber landscape. So how would a CISO appearing before a board, what would you recommend they do to dissuade the board from approving a particular?
Okay, so that sounds like a kind of a scenario where you have the organization basically fighting each other and then coming to the board to play the judge. We go this and that. In my experience, that doesn't happen, or happens very seldomly. I think what, in my experience, you can expect is the board really having an open ear and being very, very risk aware. So if there is a concern there, usually. And again, in my experience, people would want to listen very carefully and weigh the information that they get very carefully as well. So this kind of hypothetical scenario is kind of foreign to me, and I don't think that also like a setup like that doesn't probably add up to a very good risk culture either, because then you have your conflicts being played to the top level of the company. That is not I think a good way. I think if there needs to be a decision taken, and you have to weigh the pros and cons, and utmost of transparency is needed. And yes, you at time of decision, you don't know everything, you don't know the future either, and always things can change. But an open communication, transparency, decision making to happen. I don't know, Susanne, if you want to add to that.
I totally agree. I think if you have that situation, problem, really where probably then the board would be very to learn that you have trust. Coming from the financial industry, usually price tag helps, show what the costs would be, and what it actually means you can save. Again, are we easy on, or do we easily spend on preventing something? I think usually we are always after the fact. So whenever we've had the fire in the house, we know we should actually put more fire extinguisher or whatever we have. But I think it's a bit of the experience that people have. And I think also when you present, again, you need to understand where the language of the board or your senior management, and make them aware also of not just come with your words, try to actually see what they're interested in and how they are looking at it. And a lot of times I also think it's not just about me. It's like it needs to be in the big context. The board doesn't just look at my area. Again, cyber risk is probably across the company, but what does it mean? Do I understand the strategy of the risk taking that was decided? How does that fit in? How is it actually, like, how does my proposal actually fit in there? And I think there's another, like, the obligation also from the employee or from whoever the CISO, whoever wants to actually present, to also go and speak the language of the other side.
Absolutely. I mean, it speaks to that translation aspect that we had mentioned a couple of times in this discussion.
Yeah, I think statistics help. I fully agree. You have a cultural problem, and I don't want to repeat it. There's a cultural problem if the CISO needs to convince the CFO that cybersecurity is not a sunk cost. That's the one thing. That statistics help. If you show the reality out there, how many attacks, what's the average cost of an attack, and if you have these statistics ready, then that's a very, very helpful input. If you have additional information on the specific industry you're working in, there will always be a competitor who had an attack and who's in the media. That also helps. And yes, a price tag obviously helps as well, because one thing is you implement that into your budget. You can do a calculation of what your annual costs for cybersecurity are versus what your costs would be of an attack. And then it's up to the CFO to look at both numbers and then take his own decision. It is not up to the CISO, but it's up to the board to ask or to remind the CFO of the responsibility he has for the company. And I think it is one of his responsibilities to ensure that there is a business continuity, And if he sees cybersecurity expenses as a sunk cost, then I don't think he really understood his role. Now, that doesn't really help this particular CISO, but it's just a fact. I mean, and there, we talked about liability earlier. There, what I understand, if you look at the latest publications about liability of executives and board members from cyber attacks, these publications help, because if you know that you're personally liable if you didn't pay enough attention to cybersecurity, then very often that's the last little push that is needed, that these people start acting. So
we have one final question, and maybe this is a good note to end on, asking for concrete good practices and mechanisms we've observed to reinforce good behaviour, such as locking your PC, not clicking on a wrong link, reporting these. We've spoken about some of them, having contingency plans in place, business continuity plans, MFA, multi-factor authentication. Can we all perhaps think of one more good practice that businesses can do to increase their cyber resilience?
I think we're back at the awareness, what does it mean? Why not take that laptop with you? Why not actually do a little bit of exercise? It doesn't mean you need to do the finger pointing, but just kind of like how does it feel if you suddenly can't access your data anymore? And to play that, but play it in a positive way so that you can actually learn from it. You know, it should almost be like the gaming industry. You know, you should actually almost be capable of doing that. And honestly, I think what also helps are the stories. I mean, again, the stories that we hear across the world, they're just amazing. There a lot of things are also I hear which I never thought I would hear, and still I think I've also looked into cyber for a couple of years. But yeah, I think it's just keep it alive, don't make it static. I think that's what it needs to be.
Thank you. Keep it alive. I like that. Andrea?
I think the awareness training industry needs to evolve as well. You need to get away from the boring click here, click there, and then there's a little comic shown for 30 seconds. So implement that into your offsites, into your trainings, make it role plays, you know, up to escape rooms. You know, it's like, I'm not saying that every company now needs an escape room, but any kind of gamification of the topic of awareness around cybersecurity helps a lot to bring a fun element into that, and to also give an understanding. If you can feel pain of a cyber attack, then it creates that level of awareness we actually need, that people think about what they do and how they do it.
Yeah, so my piece of advice on best practice is do your risk management work. It all starts with understanding what kind of exposures you have, where you have critical assets, processes, whatever, vendors we talked about, and then go from there, because not one organization is the same as any other, and every organization has their own risk profile, and you need to organize your mitigating actions and everything around yourself, around your own risk profile. So start with that and then go from there, and don't stop. It's a process, and it's a long haul process, and not a one-off.
Right, not a point in time issue, as Andrea said. I think from my perspective, it would be to encourage people to, you know, like on the London Metro, they have this campaign, see it, say it. Stations. And I think if it happens broadly in an organizational cultural context, we're more likely to also see it in the cybersecurity space. So mine would be encourage people to speak up. So thank you all very much for sharing your time and expertise and your insights tonight. And thank you to everyone who's joined us online and for sharing all your questions. We are over time.
Exactly. It was very, very interesting discussion. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much,
Share your thoughts, thought leadership, to show thought leadership. And we had also very interesting questions from the auditorium. And yeah, thanks a lot from my name, from my team, and Yanya, thanks a lot for the moderation. It was great. And hopefully we will see each other again in another event, hopefully soon. Thanks a lot and have a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.